but now we have lesson 5, and we're looking at Matthew 19 and 23. And if you're watching this on Right Now Media, then there's a link underneath me that tells you where to find these notes. So basically, at this point, Matthew is, he's been talking to the Jews. You know that because I say it almost every time we meet. But in his talking to the Jews, he's also pointing out how they reacted to him. You know, he's writing to the Jews, but he's also sort of saying, and some of you, you know who you are. You gave him a hard way to go at the Sermon on the Mount. You gave him a hard way to go about this and that. So what we want to talk about tonight is to observe how people responded to Jesus, according to Matthew's account. And the first thing you notice is that ordinary Jews and Gentiles, you know, blue-collar people. There's nothing wrong with white-collar people, but in this case, there's a real class difference between white-collar Jews and blue-collar Jews. Because, like most third-world countries today, there are a small number of people who are quite well off, and a large number of people who are just making it every day, you know. And who is responding the most positively to the teaching of Jesus? The ordinary people, the working people. They are responding really well. Who are the people that are having the hardest time with his teaching? The ones who he is displacing. So I want to talk a little bit about why that happened, how that happened. And basically to understand that the reason that the religious authorities are so indignant by the teaching of Jesus, number one, he is in their face. There are so many things that Jesus says that would have been highly volatile to them, you know, to those people. And we don't know because of our context. And if this were that kind of Bible study, I might go into great depth and talk for several minutes about the cultural context, but just rest assured that every time Jesus says, "You have heard it said, but I say," he's about to slam the religious status quo. He's about to let them have it. And the thing he says is so profound in its truth that anybody who isn't so turned off by their indignation hears it and says, "Well, duh." I remember when I was young, the day that it really dawned on me why the Messiah had to be born in a stable and be laid in a food trough. You know, it's like all of a sudden when it really dawned on me that it made perfect sense because it didn't make any sense. You know what I mean? That like that was one of my very first adult comprehensions of the real nature of Christianity, that everything God does is absurd in the eyes of proud people, of Satan, and you know, humankind. You know, they would look at Jesus' whole plan of redemption and say, you know, I wouldn't do it that way. You know, when you realize that the wise men went to the palace to find the newborn king because that made sense. And then you realize that when they found him where he actually was, that made more sense. You know, that's when you begin to see what God is doing, that there is, God isn't contradicting, nor did Jesus contradict human convention just to be contradicting them. You know, it wasn't like, you know, if you say it's black, I'm going to say it's white. If you say it's up, I'm going to say it. It wasn't like that. That's not what Jesus was doing. What he was saying was, is you guys have gotten it so wrong that you forgot, you know, he summed it up really well. Jesus summed up his teaching, especially to the Pharisees, by simply saying, you guys know the law front to back and sideways. Probably he was talking to the scribes, you know. Like, you guys know every letter of the law, but you don't know the heart of the law. You don't know the heart of the law. And the law was not created for its own sake. It was created for the sake of the people whom God loved. You know, why do you put boundaries around your children? Right? Like when they're little, why do you create boundaries for them and say you can go here but you can't go there? You know, why do you create laws for your children? Because you love them. You know, I was listening to a podcast today on my way home, and it was right by around the time I was passing the town where my granddaughter lives, my newest granddaughter. And this podcast, they said, you know, every year 40,000 children go missing in North America. 40,000 children disappear. You know, and it's so I don't want to dwell on that. What I want to say is there's a really good reason why you protective, loving parents and grandparents and our preschool and our church ministries and everything, why do we put so much effort into protecting these children and creating rules and boundaries and everything? To protect them, you know, because we're trying to keep them safe. So what do rules and boundaries do? They keep you safe. They're here to benefit you. And so when Jesus says, you guys have perfected the word, but you haven't gotten the heart right. You've missed the whole heart of the thing. That's what he's getting at. Is it was because of God's great love for the people that God created these systems and methods for them to be in the right relationship with God and to have a healthy spiritual life. And you know, ordinary people, they got it. They got it. But here's what I think really spoke to the ordinary people, and this is what I invite you to look for when you're studying together. What really got through to the ordinary people was the fact that Jesus' message was full of grace, which is unmerited favor. It was the opposite of the teaching of the Pharisees because it didn't require you to do a lot of things that really for ordinary people are impossible. You know, these professional clergymen or these people whose entire circle of relationships involved other clergy, you know, they could maintain a lifestyle that seemed very holy and above reproach. But ordinary people, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to do what and someone says, "Oh no, you did that wrong. You know, you're never going to make it into the you're never going to make it to heaven that way." So the legalistic people usually have too much time on their hands and not much that creates difficulty in their lives. And so this was the point. They created all these complicated systems and lorded it over the people who really just needed a gospel that saves. And Jesus gave them a gospel that saves. He said God loves you and he wants to save you. And he already knows how impossible it is for you to be righteous in his sight. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders, they were self-righteous. They were living up to their own standard of righteousness. And as far as they were concerned, as long as they and their closest colleagues all agreed that they were righteous, they were. But what if somebody else is setting the standard? You know, what if you're not allowed to score yourself? You know, what if it turns out someone else is scoring your righteousness, and what he says about you is you know, all you have to do is humble yourself. Today, at the State House, I visited the Supreme Court courtroom, and it wasn't in session, obviously, but what was really remarkable to me was that it's the only room in the State House that hasn't been changed since the building was completed in, 1889, I think. And it looks like it. It's beautiful. And around the walls are the pictures of all of the judges who have sat in that courtroom since it was built. I got my picture taken in front of it because that I thought was cool. I didn't take my picture anywhere else because I didn't care, but that I thought was pretty cool. So I got my picture taken in front of it. I put it on the screen for you, but I don't have the know-how. But I looked like this. No, it was more like, no. I don't remember what I did. I probably grinned a little bit, though. But anyway, can you imagine? I'm looking at this beautiful place that just yells authority, right? And I'm looking at all this beautiful woodwork, and there's a place where someone stands in the middle of this tribunal, this group of judges, and pleads their case. And I thought, that's so cool, because tonight I'm going to talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ being a gospel where you get everything you could ever hope for by standing in a position like that before God and saying, I'm guilty. Utterly and completely guilty. I'm throwing myself on the mercy of the court. That's how you win in the kingdom. And when you do that, it says something about you to God that God wants to hear. It's humble. It's submissive. It's devoid of any pride or pretense. And when you do that, he says, get up, I love you, all is forgiven. And oh, by the way, if you're wondering how that happened, just look over here. This is my son. He made that possible for you. You might want to thank him. And oh, by the way, I'm going to make him king, so if you want, you could start following him right now. That's why ordinary people ran to Jesus to hear what he had to say. Sure, he healed them and he worked miracles and everything, but at the end of the day, he gave them more than something that solved their immediate problem. He gave them something that solved their eternal problem. And they could wrap their minds around that. The truth is we have so much comfort in our lives, and we have the capacity to have a long life. And so we have a tendency to forget that most of the people in human history had treacherous and dangerous lives, and there was never any guarantee, that you weren't going to die tomorrow by some violent means beyond your control. And so having some sense of life after death meant the world to them, and it really should to us too, if we're really honest. But we live in a situation and time and history in our own kind of world where we can sort of pretend like death doesn't happen, until it does. And then we can talk about how, they're in a better place now. Are they? I hope so. But people didn't talk that way back in Jesus' day. They wanted assurance. They wanted guarantees. They wanted absolute belief, because tomorrow anything could happen. And tomorrow you could go home for supper and a loved one not show up at the table ever after that. You know what I mean? So that's the gist of it. Matthew's gospel then culminates in God's answer to the problem of sin. All the law of Moses is fulfilled through Jesus, and then he establishes a new covenant through him. So he finishes what was started with Moses, and then establishes a new covenant, and we celebrate that every time we go to the communion table. And it's the only thing we have to do, and it's not the communion in and of itself, it's what it represents, which is total submission, total surrender, and then an agreement to follow Jesus from that point forward. So that's it in a nutshell for this week, chapters 19 to 23. And I made a suggestion here in the study guide that you read all of chapter 19, a little bit of 22, and a little bit of 23, and then answer the questions. But by all means, go beyond the questions if you feel so led. So have fun.